G'day everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be repairing some rotten windows. I'm going to show you how you can do it as well. Now we're going to need a few things here, starting with some epoxy, some wood hardener, some paint and some timber. Now I've got some dowel here. This is 8mm dowel and I've got an 8mm drill bit to suit. This is my epoxy. It's a high build and an adhesive. This is a wood hardener that just hardens up any rotten timber left behind, and some scrap bits of wood for later. Now before we jump up the scaffold, we make sure we say good day to the dogs. And now we're ready to jump into repairing this mess. Now there's 3 windows here that need some attention, as well as one around the corner and another one that needs some planing on the edge. We'll get to those later. For now, we want to chop out all the rotten timber that is apparent on the windowsill. We've masked up the window so we don't damage that or get any epoxy on it later. So I just use the multi-tool here to cut out any big chunks of rotten timber. As for the smaller chunks of timber, we'll come back later and fine tune that with some different tools. You can see here I'm using a scraper. That's just going to help me get into any tight little crevices without the need for a power tool. And then I've got the blower as well to get rid of any debris. Now the last tool I've got here is a Dremel with a burr bit on the end of it. That's really good for getting into tight little spaces. You can plunge it in and get to any awkward spots and make sure there's absolutely no rotten timber left behind. Once you're happy with all of that, we'll get in there with some sandpaper, clean it up a little bit, and then we're ready to spray our timber hardener. Now this stuff is only designed to harden soft timber. It's not going to completely revive rotten stuff. That's why we cut it out of the way, but it is definitely worthwhile to use it. Now this is the process start to finish on the other window. Just a quick little time lapse of how I go about it. And now we're ready for some epoxy. So here I have my caulking gun. It is specific to this epoxy. Now this epoxy is 2 parts and equal parts of A and B. Just squeeze it out using the caulking gun. It's going to give you equal amounts. That's the whole point of it. And then we can just stir it up on a scrap piece of plastic or paper. And we're ready to start smushing it into all those rotten areas. Now I've filled up the back edge of the windowsill to a nice, neat and straight line. And the whole point of that is that I can nail my timber onto that later. And it's all going to look nice and neat and original when we're done. Now it's pretty important to get rid of all your extra epoxy. Keep your tools clean as you go as well. This stuff does dry very hard. It is tricky to sand, so the less of it you have to sand, the better off you are. Now that I've got a good foundation of epoxy, I'm going to start cutting in my pieces of timber. This is a 20 by 20 hardwood. It's the same dimension as the sill, so we'll be able to cut this to length, put some dowels in the back of it, and put it in place of the rotten timber. Now we just want to paint up any exposed edges that we won't be able to get to later. Put our dowels in the back. We can cut the dowels to the right length. That way we won't be hitting the timber that already exists in the windowsill. After the dowels are in, we'll paint up the rest of it and we're ready to install it on the window. Now I'm just going to offer up this timber, get it in the position I want it, and then we'll be able to nail it in position and maneuver it around a little bit. The nails are only there to hold it temporarily, make sure it doesn't droop or sag, and once the epoxy goes off, that'll be doing all the work. So you can see here, as I'm using the nail gun, the timber does get knocked around a bit, the epoxy gets squished in a bit. So I will jiggle it, move it around with a hammer, get it back into the right position, and then touch up the epoxy as I need, making sure that I don't leave too much excess behind. So this is how we're going to leave it for now. We're going to let the epoxy harden. We'll come back, we can sand it, we can do any extra touch-ups with a different filler. We can use our no more gaps where we need to, and we'll be ready for paint. Now this is the next window. It's a bit of a different situation here. It is technically the same process of removing the rotten timber. And once all the rotten timber is out of the way, we can glue a block of timber in its place and fill up the rest of the gaps with some epoxy. So once again, the Dremel makes light work of all the rotten timber in the hard to reach places. After I'm finished with the Dremel, I'll come back with a multi-tool and try to cut this rotten section into a more predictable and easy shape to recreate with a block of timber. So I'm just using my square as a guide. I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle with the multi-tool. Now the multi-tool is the perfect tool for the job. It's great for plunge cutting and neatening up any of those edges that are in the hard to reach spots. We'll give it a quick sand, we'll let that wood hardener set up. Then we can measure our hole and mark it out on a scrap bit of wood. Now if you do have some larger holes like I do and you do need to fill it with some timber, I'd be using a hardwood. I wouldn't use anything less than that like pine or chipboard or MDF. It's not going to cut the mustard. And as you can see here, I've just cut out my little piece. I'm ready to paint that up and put it in its place. Now I'm going to start off by filling up any small holes on the bottom and on the edge, and then we can fill up that little bit of a gap so that there's something to hold on to the block of timber we've just cut. For now, I'm just going to get some scrap pieces of timber. I'm going to wrap them in masking tape and nail them to the edge of the window. That's going to give something for the epoxy to push up against, and it's going to give us a nice, neat line by the time we take them off. Now make sure you do wrap the timber in masking tape, otherwise you're literally just going to glue these pieces of timber to the window and you'll never be able to get them off. I'm just filling up this hole ready to accept this block of timber. Now I've already painted that and let it dry and it's ready to put in its place. You can see here the timber just needs a little bit extra nailing, stop it from moving, and then we can wriggle in our block of timber. Once our block's in the right spot, we can go back over everything, neaten it up, get rid of our excess and fill up any low spots. Once the epoxy's set, once again, we'll come back, we'll sand it back, use a different kind of filler just to get rid of any other little imperfections, and we're ready for paint. Now the last job of the day is just to plane this window down. It was rubbing on the edge, so we'll make quick work of that with an electric plane. Give it a few passes, take off the material that we need to, and then the painters can come back, paint up that edge, and finish the job off. Alright guys, that wraps up this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe. And if you do have any questions, just leave them in the comment section below and I'll make sure I get back to them. Thanks for watching.